afternoon, everyone. My name is Mia Sims Washington, Director of Digital Programming and Events for Walker's Legacy, and welcome to our Ask a Boss series. Named in honor of Madam C.J. Walker, Walker's Legacy was created with a mission to cultivate an ecosystem of access designed to inspire, equip, and engage a global network of professional and entrepreneurial women of color. You can learn more about Walker's Legacy by joining us online at www.walkerslegacy.com. It's my pleasure to introduce Natalie Madera Cofield. Natalie is the founder and CEO of Walker's Legacy, an organization she created to inspire, equip, and empower professional and enterprising women. Natalie began her career working 3 jobs in high school and started her first company at 26, growing to become a 3-time CEO by the age of 30. A millennial that found inspiration at the nexus of business, community, and politics, Natalie has carved a niche for herself as a serial entrepreneur, advocate, and speaker on all things startup and diversity. Please welcome Natalie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction, Mia. I am super excited to be here with you all today to interview, speak with, chat with, and connect with today's featured speaker, Dia Sims. Dia Sims is founder of Harris & Sims Hands, board vice chairman for St. Liberty Whiskey, and former CEO of the BRN Group. Dia spent many years working along Sean Diddy Combs at Combs Enterprises, where she began as an executive assistant and left the empire as president. Her tenure included numerous roles in which she oversaw business and creative activities for the portfolio of brands, which consisted of Cîroc Vodka, Blue Fame Agency, AQUAhydrate, Bad Boy Entertainment, Sean John, Revolt TV, and Capital Prep Harlem Schools. She is now revolutionizing the cannabis industry. Please welcome Dia Sims.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here with you today.
Absolutely. So Dia, first off, how are you doing in the coronavirus moment? How is the family? How is work? How are you doing personally, emotionally, and all of that?
Oh my gosh. Thank you for asking that. We're safe and well, so we are grateful, very busy. I think, to be honest, I am less concerned about COVID than I am concerned about the level of divisiveness that is declining in the country right now. That is actually the thing that does keep me up at night. I think we'll get through, I think the virus piece of it, I'm not worried about that, but the healing this country requires is a real crazy 911 right now.
Yeah, it is. On top of so many other things, right? So we have the circumstance of the economics, the circumstance of racial tension, the political races, and then on top of that, we've got coronavirus. So, Dia, let's get started. First, I shared a bit of your biography, and I think for those who are joining us to hear that someone has gone from executive assistant to become the president of the organization, obviously that manages a portfolio of some of the most globally renowned entertainment brands in the world. Like, how do you go through that journey? Walk us through how that experience transpired for you from a career perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did not have like a linear path forward. Before working for Combs Enterprises, I was in ad sales and radio. And radio sales is like super hustle. It's like selling crack. Like the money you make is the money you bring in the building. So you get a salary, but you have to cover your own salary essentially. I inherited all the music labels as a category in New York. And Bad Boy Records at the time refused, anybody listening from New York may remember this, refused to advertise on this station in New York called Power 105 because they were so loyal to the legendary hip hop station Hot 97. So in the beginning, I was able to convince the marketing executives and kind of broke Bad Boy Records as a client for a first-time advertiser, and then start to work with them quite a bit more on different projects. And when Pop was looking for a chief of staff, actually, one of the executives reached out to me and said, would you be interested in coming over to interview for this job? And I honestly think she literally was basically like, you send emails at 3 a.m., he sends emails at 3 a.m., I think you'll get along. So I'm always down. This is one thing I will say. I will always take the interview, right? You never know what relationship you're going to make. I'll take the interview. It might not be for me. Get the offer and be like, I can't do it, but I got somebody else. Like whatever, it helps to build relationships. Interview with Puff, shortest interview I'd ever had. It was like 6 minutes, but he asked great questions, was pointed, and they called me and said, would you be willing to come over? But you have not really managed large teams. So he would like you to start as an executive assistant instead of taking the chief of staff role. And I literally was like, you can't call me the janitor. This is the salary I need to be at. Like I'm not about titles because I feel like the real reason why I was interested in taking the role was at my heart, I'm just a super geek. And I felt like, you know what, this is someone who I can learn from. Right? This is somebody that I can go and learn about being entrepreneurial, learn how to build things from scratch, and learn how to shift culture. Frankly, that was my real priority. So I went over and started as executive assistant. And, I was really fortunate. I think we had a good work vibe in terms of the fact that Pop is an enormous visionary, a real dreamer. And literally I would be like the dream factory. So if he's like, I want to change the sky purple, I want to have magical unicorns doing doing two-step dance. I want to figure out, I'm going to be the one to be like, yes, we can do that. I found out this unicorn population that's in Argentina. We're going to be able to do uniforms. We're going to do shoes. We're going to do a kids line for the unicorn, and figure out how you make it operational, profitable, scalable, and also do some real good in the world at the same time. So I think we were a good match in terms of vision and execution. And I was fortunate to continue to be promoted within the first 3 months and on up until being president, the first president actually, in the history of Combs Enterprises.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, for those it's funny because I was talking about Making the Band recently and I was talking to someone younger. They're like, what show? Junior's Cheesecake? Where is that? I was like, oh my God. But for anyone who watched Making the Band, we know how strenuous it must be to work for the man, the icon, Sean Puffy Combs. So for you to go on to become the first president of his enterprise really shows, one, your work ethic, and two, what it takes in terms of trust and how trust gained over time, maintained over time, and how so much of the world opens up to you when people trust you with their baby, which is their business and their enterprises. And so, yeah, that's something I think that really goes to your character and your leadership. So before I move on to kind of, your new career path, which I'm very excited to talk about and want to hear more insights about your visions and your belief in the cannabis industry and how we need to be engaged in it from the investor perspective, the business owner perspective, and other perspectives. I want to ask you a couple questions about what maybe 3 of the top lessons that you learned during your time working with Sean Puffy Combs might have been.
So I think the first one would be around being audacious. I think particularly I'm so inspired now. I'm 40, I just turned 45, but I'm inspired when I see what young women and young men are now very, unapologetic about what their worth is. And it's not much has changed practically, but the spirit is starting to change, right? We were coming up, if you were buying Black media, it was at a discount. If you were getting any Black businesses were getting the very small leftover crumbs, really in every industry. And from day one, Puff was very focused on whatever dollars I generate, whatever price I set is going to be the expectation for everybody who comes behind me. So we can't just crack open the door a little bit, right? We have to charge for what we're actually worth because we're setting the price, we're setting the market. As an example with Cîroc Vodka, we came in and set the appropriate expectation so that the next 100 artists that came behind us had a level of belief and faith and could walk in and name their number as they should. We know how to activate an audience that changes culture. Besides what we actually sell one-to-one, it reverberates globally. So you have to charge for that. There's an X factor, there's a multiple. And I think we all have to get real comfortable with being audacious about what we're worth. Women in general, Black women especially, that wherever you work, you have to contribute 3X because that's the way many of us are raised in order to be taken seriously. You need to charge for that, right? And I think that is something that I will always take with me. I think the second piece is around the importance of the integrity of the product. I used to be a running joke that like I could make your birthday a national holiday, right? Like we had such an ability to affect culture and go out and say, all right, tonight, if I want to, I can affect 90 million people on Instagram with a message. Buy this, click here, da da da. You can't do that twice. Like I could throw you a dope birthday party, but if you get there and the spirits are whack and the DJ is off and the food is terrible and it's too hot, you're not coming back next year. And he had such integrity on not taking advantage of his ability to turn on culture and say, but when they get there, when they come to my party, when they taste the Cîroc Vodka, when they try this Sean John soup, they should be delighted with the experiences. I have to stand behind the integrity of the product that I advocate for. And I will never lose that important nugget. I think the last point would be around, and I think to his credit on this last point, Puff was very intentional about his own evolution and what it meant to be a manager, and what it meant to be a leader, and what it meant to inspire the total human being, right? So I'll give you a first-hand example where I was at work. It was very 24-hour, can't stop, won't stop. That's not a game. So I get a call from my mom, and I'm a real daddy's girl. My dad was like ex-military police, black belt, very strong. And so, your father is on the way to the hospital. He has collapsed and he can't walk. So I just like put my things down, I tell like one person and walk out the office. I'm at the hospital, devastated. And I don't tell Puff, I just say I have a family thing. I just keep it privately, but somebody tells him. Next thing I know, he has called the hospital, had my father moved to the best hospital in Manhattan, called the doctors personally and said, this is my godfather, treat him accordingly. And the truth is, there's not enough money that will ever replace that kind of loyalty and trust, right? So like those kind of things, and understanding that, of course, we all go to work to make money, but when you care actually about the whole human being, you get so much more out of the relationship. It's so much more valuable. I mean, I think that is the third and frankly, probably the most important lesson.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So Dia, let's talk about, your transition to the cannabis industry. Obviously, there are very few minorities in this space, and certainly very few women and women of color in this space. Number one, what kind of first preempted this interest? How did you go from working with Sean Combs to now kind of your transition into the cannabis space?
Yeah, so I am involved. So to be clear, I'm still working both in spirits and cannabis. I actually have an exciting announcement next month. So hopefully maybe in 2020 I'll be back.
Good to know. Heard it here first.
When I initially left Combs Enterprise, the thing that was interesting to me was the cannabis industry people were making just ridiculous amounts of cash. And who wasn't making money were young people, were women, were minorities, and which was just a travesty to me. I grew up with the idea that if you want to change something, the easiest way is to change it from the inside, right? It's not as easy to change it from the outside. So I said, look, I want to become a part of this industry to see how I can bring in more people who look like me, who have been disproportionately penalized as a result of laws around this industry. And now people are benefiting from it. And I feel like my culture is not benefiting from it. And you still have today, in one state, somebody making $50 million off of what somebody's still in jail in the next state for, which is ludicrous. So that was really my inspiration initially. I'm still involved in it. I now have a broker in Florida that works in distribution, specifically for CBD brands, and then also just branding and marketing, which is a huge opportunity in this space because you have a lot of great products, but not the sophistication of like CPG brands. So if you have expertise in branding, the cannabis industry needs you. If you have agricultural, know-how, cannabis industry needs you. And then we know for a fact that when you have diverse boards and diverse leadership, companies make more money. I mean, some studies show as much as 3 times. So if you have any level of diversity, cannabis industry needs you. I actually recommend a company called Bangst, Bangst. They're a recruiter in the space. Walker's Legacy has enormous relationships. I think, make this type of platform is exactly for that. But I want to see more of us represented there.
Yeah, it's funny because I think that there was a gap in time. One, due to trauma, and two, I think due to a stigma around cannabis and marijuana in our community. So I'll speak to the trauma piece, as you talked about. Obviously, the criminalization of Black and brown men across this nation for offenses with marijuana. And so it has traumatized our community as it relates to how we experience it, right? And then I think that there is a very zealous Christian community that exists that kind of sees marijuana or saw marijuana as a drug. And I think that we have missed a lot of time in the business moment opportunity as it relates to engaging around cannabis, educating people around what cannabis is, how it can be a healing mechanism, how it's used for medicinal purposes, things that your ad policy was changing. And I think some of that also led to us missing out on business opportunities in this space. Do I have it wrong, Dia? Am I thinking about this all wrong?
I think you're totally right. And the truth is, again, we have an extra burden of the way we show up, right? So it's not as easy to be like, oh, I'm not getting this cool new thing, because it can stick with you for life.
Right.
So I do think, like, Black community was a little reticent when it first took off. That said, I don't think it's too late. I don't think it's too late, because it's not just the industry. There's all the ancillary industries supporting it. It's often called like the green rush. And when you compare it to the actual gold rush, which transformed America, transformed the state of California to become what was then not even a state, what is now California typically comes in between like 6th and 8th in the world. Like if California was a country, it would be like 6th and 8th in terms of GDP. The gold rush was actually the foundation of that. And the companies that lasted for the long run were not the miners who actually got gold. It was Levi's who provided the jeans to those companies. It was Wells Fargo who started banking at that time. It was the shovel makers, right? So I think thinking about cannabis industry, I think is here to stay in terms of the plant and the product. But there's a lot of opportunity for tech support, for the right accessories, for the dispensaries, for the retail front of it, for the social media community piece of it, for the on-premise retail. There's a lot. So I think be creative. The cannabis industry is like any other industry. Anything you're good at, math, law, there's space for it. So I would think about it like a new frontier.
So Dia, for you, is there a difference, and for the viewers and for those who are thinking of this, is there a difference between cannabis and marijuana? Are those the same thing? Are they interchangeable in terms of how they're used? What is the difference, if there is one?
Yeah, so cannabis, there really is no difference. That's just more of a nomenclature thing. And as I understand it, marijuana was a made-up name from, I guess, about a little over a century ago, when it was kind of a campaign to make it less attractive because it was a whole issue with farming. And the idea was to drive to Americans that it was coming from Mexico. So it was marijuana. And I understand it was a made-up name, and that there's no real substance to it. Underneath cannabis, you have THC, which is what in terms of like, oh, I feel like I have a buzz or some type of effect. And the CBD, which is more well known for its anti-inflammatory effects and a ton of other things that are coming out from our research, helping with sleep, things like that. But essentially, it's just a plant. And when you think about any substance, it's interesting how somewhat arbitrary what is legal and what isn't. I used to be, in my 100 jobs, I used to be a pharmaceutical sales rep. And I carried a drug called Paxil, but I was familiar with a legal drug called Wellbutrin, right, which helps to treat for smoking cessation, anti-anxiety. If you look at the pharmacokinetic profile of Wellbutrin compared to ecstasy, which is illegal, they're actually not all that different. So it's interesting. It's like, who has the better lobby, right? Like, does Apple have the better lobby versus pears? Even cinnamon is dangerous if you take it in abundance, right? But nobody is worried about cinnamon. So it's an interesting proposition. It probably could be a whole nother conversation. But the reality is, just the clinical research that we know from the centuries and centuries of people engaging with cannabis, it seems to be abundantly safe. Much safer than things that are actually readily available. That's been my experience with it. My mother has multiple sclerosis. She's been in chronic pain for at least 35 years. We're in the state of Maryland, where she was able to get a medical legal license. And for the first time in decades, she's been able to sleep through the night. It is really transformative.
Wow. So was there, when you started thinking about getting into this space, was there anything, obviously maybe kind of with your mother and her health condition, that inspired you, seeing the medicinal purposes of this?
Absolutely, because I will tell you practically, to this day, I've never smoked weed in my life. I've used the CBD side. I don't have anything against it whatsoever, but it was much more about like focus group of one, but seeing my mother, like, wow, what a difference it made in her life. And then I started doing the research and seeing all these news about kids with epilepsy and being able to manage the nausea when you have chemotherapy for cancer patients, or people who just couldn't even sleep through the night, and finding healing from CBD. It's actually really incredible, just from a straight up, I don't want to overstate it, but it feels like, wow, this is like a miraculous opportunity that can really benefit people, which is my favorite thing to do. Like if I can do well by doing good, it's the best combination.
And I love that you, Dia, broke down the kind of vernacular around cannabis and the contradictions of marijuana and how that was kind of created, right? To stigma to cannabis. And so much of business is about the language, right? So while one person is saying, oh, I may be selling marijuana, another person says, I'm selling cannabis, or I'm doing something in the cannabis industry, and it feels different. You experience it differently. It sounds like a better business proposition, or, it's obviously created in so many ways to keep people out, right? That type of vernacular, if someone is not trained or learned in how to use it, they may go somewhere and say one word versus another, and that might be the thing that says, I don't know about this person. So, Dia, let's talk about how you get in the game. Obviously, you're in it. We're talking about kind of some of the medicinal purposes and really kind of breaking ground on, just what this is, right? So many of us have experienced it in different ways, and I'll leave that out there for whomever needs to catch that. But I want to talk about the business side of this. So, you were inspired and then you decided to get started. Like, how does someone, and what ways can someone get started in the vastness of what is the cannabis industry?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And some of these things, they really seem very simple. But the first thing is you have to vote, right? So whatever your political affinity is up to you. But if you care about this industry, it has to matter. So this last couple of weeks, Joe Biden mentioned that he's interested in decriminalizing marijuana. If that's somebody that you're interested in supporting, you have to take that into consideration to make sure that this will be federally legal and it will be easier for you to become a part of it. One. Two, financial capital is it's just one of the biggest hurdles that young people face, that minorities face, and that women face. There is no lack of it's a better way to describe it, is like there's genius in every zip code, right? It's not like there's not an abundance of ideas. But if you can't properly fund those ideas and you don't have the entrepreneurial resources, you're screwed, truthfully. So I think even your mindset in how you approach fundraising is important. I will tell you, I think when I was coming up, the idea of like going asking people for money for your company, it feels like you're going asking for a favor. I had to learn over the years that like, no, this is an exchange of services, right? And it's a benefit to be able to invest in your company if you have a viable concept. So I think getting real comfortable with fundraising and making relationships with the investor community is incredibly important. And getting comfortable with, to your point, the right vernacular to make sure your idea is palatable and you can raise dollars around it. People are investing hundreds of millions of dollars every day. As an example, I mentioned radio sales. And when the very first time I got into radio sales, I was like, I don't want to do sales. I don't want to call people all day and ask them for money. And then somebody crystallized me very clearly. They said they are spending the money anyway, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the money is getting spent. So It's just a matter of like, are you going to be the person to receive it? And then I was like, oh, I can do that. Now that's different. The money's already being spent. You have to think about the investment community in the same way, that like it is happening every day. We deserve our fair share in cannabis and as minorities. So thinking through, look up a company called Canaccord. They're one of the biggest investors out of Canada. And they will start to give you examples of other investors in the space. Benzinga is another great resource for the cannabis industry. Can Inclusive is just terrific because they very much specifically focus on minority opportunities, and they do great work in the space, and they build a great community so you can learn from one another. And then do your research. If you're in a state where you can walk into a dispensary, ask questions, ask what's selling, see if they're hiring, see if you can volunteer at certain events. There are, particularly, I know it's happened in Maryland, it recently happened in Massachusetts. Many of the states are now going back out and saying, no, if we're going to give out licenses, we need to have a certain proportion of minority owners. Make sure you are checking the news, Googling it every day so you don't miss a chance to apply.
I love it. There are two women that I know. I think one definitely in DC who has been just doing her thing with her dispensary. And this is probably like maybe her 7th career, so to say, an older woman. And I think when she probably first started talking to people about getting into the cannabis industry, they were like, what, why? And now she has just really been transforming advocacy around it, minority diversity and inclusion around it. So hats off to her. And then there's one other young woman who is in Maryland, who actually is one of the very few who has a dispensary. And there is a Black gentleman that I know, and I think he was one of very few that actually got approved in his area. So it's difficult, but it's possible to be on the dispensary side of this game. I do know that there is a lot of capital that you need to have access to. I think it's probably close to, because even the application to apply to become a dispensary is close to about $100,000 to apply to become a dispensary. But to your point, Dia, this is, there are different business ventures that you would be required to invest capital into anyways, whether you were creating a tech startup or doing something like a dental practice, there's still initial startup capital that is needed. And when you're fundraising, to your point, this is not fund begging. This is, this is fundraising because there is an opportunity. There's an upside to this, which is that you have the potential to be able to reap financial reward from coming into this business early. And that may be so early that it might be at the application phase. Because I remember being a part of a group that was trying to raise funds at the application phase for this process, because that number, that $100,000 number, can be daunting to a lot of people to even get in the game. But it's definitely possible. And I think, Dia, to your point, what I was excited about too is the idea that there are so many opportunities. I've seen cannabis-based accounting companies because of the financial record keeping, and some banks do allow for cannabis banking. Some banks do not. It really just depends. And so I've seen businesses sprout up in lots of areas. And I think, to your point, thinking of this as an entire comprehensive industry and what the entire industry would need, right? It's not just one thing. It's everything. You mentioned marketing. There's product. There is dispensary. There is advocacy. I mean, you can build a business in any derivative, in any kind of space within this industry. So think big about what that could be.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So Dia, to that point, and kind of thinking about this as an industry, which it is, and how many industries across our nation have actually been impacted by COVID. Have you seen any impact on your business or for the industry as it relates to the cannabis industry and any COVID-19 impact, whether positive or negative? Because I think in some instances, people think that, COVID is only creating a destructive moment for most businesses. And there are businesses that are actually faring well during this moment. So I don't know if cannabis might be an industry that might be doing well, given the heightened level of anxiety and things that people are experiencing during this time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm in both cannabis and spirits, and there was a lot of benefit during this time. It's been a difficult time, obviously, but from a purely business standpoint, the fact, one, that a lot of the cannabis dispensaries were declared essential during shutdowns was quite a critical and important point for lobbyists when they are lobbying regulatory. Because it's difficult to say, well, something's not federally legal, but yet it's deemed essential in some of the largest states in the United States. So that was actually quite beneficial. And yes, people are, there was increased consumption, I think, particularly because obviously anxiety is at an all-time high. I mean, 2020, it could be like a dragon at your door any day. So absolutely. And the same in spirits. You saw, it's been difficult to see how restaurants and hotels, some of their business has been eviscerated. But on the flip side, some novel, not really novel, but some antiquated things that have been in the books were temporarily lifted. So before you order dinner for delivery, you could not order spirits. That's kind of silly at this point, right? Because we're all adult, and if you're an adult and you're already paying for your steak or your delicious vegan taco, whatever it is, and you'd also like to have a glass of mezcal. Why can't you show your ID at the door, right? So those were lifted, and it really saved a lot of restaurants from closing down. And it was good for the spirits industry, good for restaurants, good for economy, good for jobs. So we're all hopeful that these short-term fixes become long-term solutions, because it's actually to the benefit, it's to the greater benefit of the community.
Got it. I love it. And I was thinking that, because as I mentioned, so many of us have gone through different, I know for myself, I'll speak for myself personally, different moments of anxiety during, we're still in this pandemic, right? I think we've all figured out a way to cope and deal with it during this moment. But it has been definitely very challenging. And you're right. The dispensaries were deemed to be essential businesses. And I think that was a pivotal moment for the industry, right? Mm-hmm. To be able to have that type of classification during that time. So Dia, as we kind of start to wrap up our conversation today, I want to have, an opportunity to ask you some general questions about women of color and women in leadership and, and just in general. You've talked about, the vastness of the different types of jobs that you've had, which I love to hear, right? Because as you started off, you talked about there was no linear path for you. And I think so many people think that there is, right? And so what do you say both to the young woman who is either just coming out of college and trying to figure out what am I going to do, and I'm graduating in the middle of this COVID craziness, or the woman who just recently got laid off from her job and is saying to herself, what am I going to do in the middle of this COVID craziness? Obviously, at two different points of life, but asking the same fundamental question.
Yeah, no, it's enormously just tricky times, but I think the simplest thing, and this is not for everybody, but really consider entrepreneurship. And I can't say this like often and loudly enough, and this is why I love what you do at Walker's Legacy. To my point of view, this should be part of your curriculum in first, second, third grade, right? And I don't know that we are really equipped. In fact, I love, Natalie, how I noticed you, to your point, I think we're both on the same page of how important lexicon is. And in the beginning of your video, you don't just say we inspire, you say we equip. That's the difference, right? In terms of like, you could be inspired to climb a mountain, but if you don't have the rappelling equipment or right resources, you can't do it. If you're in a situation now where like, I have got to figure out how to bring income into my life, and there are a lot of opportunities sitting even in disaster. And also sometimes do the math. I don't want to judge anybody, but a lot of people don't take the time to do the math of, you think you make whatever it is. Let's say you think you make $75,000, but what are you taking home every day, right? Because when you look at the difference in the tax treatment when you run your own business versus being an employee, it is significant. It is quite significant. So take the time to say, let me do the math. What am I good at? What skill can I provide? I think narrow focus yields broad results. And there is honor in all work. So you may have been I was a VP, I was making this. And then you do the math and realize, I was only taking home, 59% of that money. I'm not going to be a VP. I'm going to be hardworking, but running this franchise, running this hot dog cart, being the best nail tech I can be. But you actually could make more money if that's what you're in it for, right? There are so many gaps happening right now in terms of, like whether you want to have your cleaning picked up at home because you're scared to go out, whether there's deep cleaning services that are needed because of the fact that people are now much more conscious about like, oh golly, I'm scared, it's a pandemic, but it's just, who knows, it could be more. How am I taking care of myself and my family? There's an opportunity for pod instruction, right? So many kids doing virtual learning right now, but if you have one or two parents who are working, it's not easy just to be like, I'm gonna be a teacher and work. There's a lot of opportunity to say, well, I can come for these services. You don't have to necessarily be a teacher, and say, I will sit with 3 kids. I will charge you, whatever it is, $250 a day, but I'll split it up between the 3 families. There are, in the midst of these challenges, look to your left and right and think about what you're naturally good at, what you will be doing anyway, and how you monetize it. There's room. The world is abundant. There's room for it.
I love it too, because one of the things I say to my team all the time, and it's something I heard, which is in Chinese, the character for chaos is the same one for opportunity. And so, as you mentioned, looking to your left and looking to your right to see what exists, and also kind of taking the time to kind of frame the life that you want. That's kind of what I got from what you said too, dear, right? Which is like, okay, I may be home and I may be with my children, I might be a teacher, this might be difficult for me. Is there another way that I can do both of these things at the same time, given that in some regards, technology has made it more difficult because we're all at home, but it's also leveled the playing field for things that I can do because I'm home and I don't have to be on the road. I mean, Dia, you and I both know that prior to COVID, we were on the road. I mean, that was part of, like, you know, the uncalculated hours and the tax of being, you know, successful and being out here in the face of our respective efforts, is that you're on the road. And I've taken time myself to think, do I really need to be on the road as much as I was before? Like, why was I always on the road? You know, is that necessary? And I think all of us also know that we're not going to go back to life as we used to know it. We're going to go into a hybrid of life as we know it now and life as we used to know it. And that's going to be life as it will be. So, you know, it's kind of like a relationship. You can't just go back to it because it's not going to be the same. It's not the same moment in time, not the same age. You don't have the same circumstances going on. You know, be back up, but it's going to be a different situation. So
you're totally right.
To think about, you know, themselves and their lives in that capacity. And the other thing that I love that you said, Dia, when we first started was you didn't care what your title was, right? And this is the moment for humility. And I'm going to ask you a question about humility in a second, but Cheryl talks about the fact too that you don't ask what seat you're going to have on a rocket ship. You just get on the thing, right? So it's not, it doesn't matter if you were called the executive assistant. At the end of the day, as you mentioned, your coins were your coins. Okay. And your title was your title, but you knew you were being prepared for something else. And so there's probably someone right now that is graduating or just got laid off and may have an opportunity sitting in front of them. And they're saying to themselves, I'm better than this, right? I did all this at school. I got top grades, or I was the executive of this, and that. And I deserve to have better than this right now. And that may very well be true. But I would also say take heed on opportunities that present themselves and be entrepreneurial, because you never know, as you were, Dia, where you may go with what opportunity was presented to you at that moment. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And it speaks to a lot of things about taking risk, about not being scared to negotiate. And that if you have a chance to get on the rocket ship, get on the ship. It doesn't matter if you have the knowledge. Maybe you didn't have a chance to read the manual. I think we also suffer from this idea that there's some real big difference between us and Bezos and us and the king of it. It's not. Like, we all, literally all human beings share 99.5% of the same genome pattern. That's just a fact. If aliens came, they would look at us like different color ants, right? We're not as different as we think you are. And I've been fortunate to be in rooms with you know, multi-billionaires, huge, brilliant people. And the reality is, maybe I couldn't fly a rocket. Maybe it would take me 3 years, where it would take somebody a month to learn about jet propulsion. But I can do it, and all of us can do it. So, like, you have to think through this idea that these things are not available to you. In real life, I know for sure. I'm fortunate to, like, travel around, to your point, and I have met so many people who are like, well, I think I'll be very happy to get to here. And if you're very happy, that's actually the real goal. But if you're holding yourself back because you think there's some missing information or skills, when information has been democratized because of technology, just go ahead and you can figure it out on the way. I promise you can figure it out. There are tons of studies that show how, and hopefully this is changing, but historically, men will apply to jobs even if the job description does not match their actual skill sets. They don't care. They're like, I'll figure it out, I can do it. Women will actually look at it and check, oh, I don't know how to do these 3 things. I don't apply. Just apply. Nobody knows how to do everything. You have to figure it out along the way and be willing to take risk.
And so let's dovetail that taking risk into humility, because they almost kind of go hand in hand a little bit, right? So it's almost like you have to be humble enough to know that there's going to be some stuff you don't know about this next journey that you're taking, right? And if you want to get to another space with your career or opportunities or whatever, it's good to not know everything, right? Because that means that you're leveling up, right? If you always know everything, that means that you're probably staying in the same stratosphere of where you were. So you want to level up, which means now I don't know everything. Like, have you ever had a moment where you've been humbled, but you recovered from the humility and turned that into a moment of definition for maybe your career or a business venture that you had?
You know, so you said a lot. You said a lot of good stuff there. So I think the one, because it's really important. I think that one is, Puff would always say this. He said, we have to hire people who make us better. Right. So like the idea is like you hire somebody, you don't hire somebody smart so you tell them what to do. You hire somebody smart so they tell you what to do. Right. So I think you got to come with that approach. I often say, not to be on a like just t-shirt mantras, but like I always say, like everyone has something to learn and everyone has something to teach. So like you have to live in that level of being humble, because the brightest people are always seeking more and more knowledge. I don't want to be around people who think they know everything, because that's going to be a fruitless room for me. I want to be in a room as much as I can where I'd love to be in a room where let me be the dumbest person in the room. Let me be the less expensive house on the block, right? Because I got nothing but room to grow from there. So I think it's important that you seek company that inspires you. I'm really fortunate, just literally my friends that I've had since I was 8 years old, just brilliant, bad, kind, amazing women. And it's true that iron sharpens iron. So, you know, as you think about how you're humble and you take risks, you have to think about the people you spend your time with and are they inspirational to you. That's incredibly important. In terms of a specific moment, let me think, golly. Let's see. I would say it was a real aha moment for me. In my 20s, I worked as a like a promoter with, if anybody, you know, maybe dating myself, but gentleman named Mark Barnes, probably one of the best events.
You're not dating yourself. You don't know who Mark was or is. You don't know about nightlife. Okay, so
nightlife, and he was very it was the first time it occurred to me. And at the time, I used to work for the Department of Defense. That's my previous, I was doing like contract negotiations. But it was like I was a federal government employee. Great learning, but I was going along that like, well, let me just continue to be an employee. And I started to do the math of how much money was going through this account. It was called Republic Gardens. It was a small, beautiful venue, but thousands of people would go through every night. So I started thinking through like, well, how much does this cost per person? This many days a week, per drink. And I added up and said, this is making millions and millions of dollars a year. And at that point, I might have been like 23. And it just hadn't occurred to me that like, oh, one little lounge on U Street in DC is making millions of dollars. And it was humbling because I said to myself, like, what are you doing with your time? Because you're working hard. Like, it's not like you're not working hard, working for being an employee. I was like, so I could be working just as hard and be out here figuring out how to make millions. And it was a real moment that I think kind of changed my pathway to figuring out how I could be more entrepreneurship. Because it's like, you're going to do the work anyway. Right. How can I have something where I'm going to reap the benefits, where my 7-year-old daughter is going to reap the benefits from it? And it was, it definitely was humbling because it made me reshape my approach.
I love it. So, you know, one of the things that, I don't know if you know who Nellie Galan is. Do you know who Nellie Galan is?
Well, the name is familiar, but no.
I feel like you guys need to connect. So Nellie was, she was the first female CEO of Telemundo. And we had an interview with her. She would be someone probably that would be great for you to connect with as well. But she talks about the fact that she saved so much of her money while she was working at Telemundo, while she saw other people doing this and other people doing that. And when you were just speaking, it made me kind of think about, you know, you were at this job and you were looking at the next chapter, right? You know, may have known it or may not have known it, right? But you were just like, wow, you know, there's an opportunity there, and I didn't see it before. And the lights went off, and when the lights go off, you can't turn them off. They go on, and they stay on. And even if you don't act on it, you will always feel something about the fact that you know that the lights went off. Okay, and so for us in life, it's like, how many times do the lights go off on us that we should act on, right? Because you never want to be thinking about, man, I remember when, you know. So Nellie just talks about the idea of saving a lot of your money while you're working to help with that transition. And while you were talking, it made me think, in this moment of COVID, we should be saving our money, right? And so this is the moment to save. And she recommended having a 2 to 3 years worth of your salary. And I was like, whoo, you know, how did we get there, right? Somebody's like, but 2 to 3 years worth of your salary. And I remember listening to Lisa Nichols, and she talks about how she saved $60,000 for herself, and that became her dream fund. And she did that with $250 every month here and there. And over her 5 years, it became $60,000, right? And so you never know where you can start skimming back So to your point, Dia, when you are looking at something and you're doing the math, because all of us have, and you are thinking about something and this is the math on that, you actually have the financial runway to be able to make that jump, right? Because the stakes are higher when you get older. You've got kids, you've got stuff, you know? And when we're younger, it's just like, I can do it, you know? Like maybe my parents will let me live in that one room they still have at the house. So I encourage young women to think like that. You probably do. If you have a room, you still got a room. I would always say to myself, the bottom is I just got to move back home. But that's my bottom, and that's still a privileged bottom to have, right?
It's a privileged bottom, and I think we have to also know though that it is a great misconception. As important, it is critical what you said to save, but you will never save or work your way to wealth. Right.
That's
so
right.
it's, you know what I mean? Just to be clear, like, and that is something that like you need the savings for the comfort, you need the savings for the bridge, but it's also as simple as, do you have to, you know, maybe you got to sell 100 t-shirts on Friday. It's both. Like, how do you figure out how to invest? How do you learn about how to be a part of the stock market? Like all the wealth that's created in this company that's not in this country that's not inherited is coming from the markets and investments, real wealth. And for the most part, the difference in the work you are doing to make $40,000 a year is not that different in what it is to make a couple $1 million different. It might be different to make 300 million, but the 40,000 to the 2 million is probably not that different. So it's just a matter of your approach and the efficiency of your time.
I love it. Okay, Dia, my last question. You talked about being in the room with billionaires. Yes. And some of us are like, oh, we're not worthy. We haven't been there yet. But you talked about them being regular people, right? And so is there something outside of, you know, just the humanity of that, right? Which seems so unattainable for others and so aspirational for others. Was there something that you gleaned from the billionaire lifestyle that had you not been, you know, predisposed to it, it might not have been something that you would have thought about in that manner? And this isn't just what maybe you engage with Puffy, it's more also like anybody that he brought you around, and I don't need names. We don't need names for confidentiality. I know that.
One thing you hit on already, right, is spending money where it makes sense. It's like not the frivolous spending things that have no value. I think was important. I think another huge thing is component was just the efficiency of time. This is something I care a lot about, and I found that people who are really high net, self-made, to clarify, high net worth, if that's a thing really, because we all contribute to anybody that's making it, is the truth is most of us waste a lot of time. Now I'm 45, I go back to where I grew up in Queens, New York, and I talk to people that I knew 25 years ago. They are literally saying the same things they were about to do, right? There's a tribe in Africa that does not have the conditional tense. Would, should does not exist because you did it or you didn't do it. And the running joke of Beyonce has the same 24 hours we do is a real thing. I'll tell you, the running thing I've seen was they tended to get up early. That seems like a very small thing, but one very simple thing was they tended to be like, oh, I start my day at 6. Oh, I start my day at 5:30, I start my day at 7. Because they know that saying time is money is an insult to time. And that you have got to get the most out of your day because it is the most precious gift you have that you can weaponize to get the best out of your life. That comes back to being humble. That comes back to being grateful. And if you wake up in the day, and this is not only whenever I get asked, like, do you have any rituals? Do you do anything the same? The only thing I do the same every day is wake up and be grateful for the fact that my feet even hit the ground. And I found that how important your time is was a reigning theme for billionaires. And the last thing is something that this community, I think, is doing right now. What you do, Natalie, is they take care of each other. I can tell you how many our strength as a group is enormous. We could not be stopped as long as you work in collaboration. When I have a chance to be around these billionaires, these 100 millionaires, they are calling their roommate from college to do this thing. They are making sure their son's homeboy's parents are taken care of in this next round. They ensure they keep the wealth in their community. They build each other up along the way. I feel like I'm super inspired to see that we are now at the point that we're working and we're coalescing our efforts. But the things that we can do to get $5 a person, right? You know what I mean? You think about raising $60,000, but you could also go out, do a Kickstarter for 15, ask everybody you know for $25. The things we can build together, we will be unstoppable. And That's an incredible tenet that I feel like I've learned in those rooms.
I love it. Dia said, weaponize your time. I felt that one. I was like, yes, this is the closing church session we having right here. It has been so amazing sharing the stage with you today. I am grateful for your time. We at Walker's Legacy are thankful for all the gems that you have shared and the time that you have given us and the community of women that we represent. And we would just love to thank those who joined us for today's conversation. And obviously this will be available on demand. So if you missed anything, feel free to join us back again on Facebook, YouTube, or on Twitter to view it again. Walker's Legacy programming looks to bring you insightful, meaningful opportunities for conversation and community. And we hope that you found today during this special on-demand and live conversation. We have a couple of upcoming programs, which we are super excited about. On October 30th, we are going to be having the launch of our men's program. So Walker's Legacy women always get, we always get men that come to our stuff and say to us, can I come? Is it okay if I show up? You know, my wife wanted me to come too. And I'm like, it's okay. You all can come. But we have 30 power-packed speakers, industry leaders, and Isaiah Thomas, who will be doing our keynote for the Men Who Enterprise Digital Summit on October 30th. Check us out online and learn more about that. We also have our weekly Co-work and Connect series coming up on Wednesday. And last but not least, we have Arlen Hamilton joining us next week on the 23rd for a conversation with investors. Arlen is a boss, and a boss. And that's all we interview with Ask a Boss. So again, thank you all so much. And Dia, it was awesome. Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Thank you so much, Ali.
Absolutely.